Okay, thanks again. Thanks everyone for coming here. And thanks for the kind introduction. It is my great pleasure to visit Hong Kong again this year. So first, I want to thank to people who made this visit possible. So first, obviously Satoshi Araki, who kind of kindly invited me to this university, and also Aris Won. She basically arranged all the trips. So thanks for that. So again, my name is Fumio Uchikoshi. I'm currently an academic scholar, which is a postdoctoral fellow at Harvard University, specifically Weatherhead Center for International Affairs, and also the Harvard Academy for International Area Studies. So I'm delighted to be here and also excited to share one of my ongoing work, focusing on the sort of the implication of the strong linkage between marriage and childbearing for declining fertility and also marriage in East Asia. Although here I focus on the Japanese context, but I believe that the implication can be applicable to the other East Asian context. And I can use the sticker. Yes. Okay. So first, I acknowledge my collaborators, Ryota Mugiyama, he's an associate professor at Gakushin University, and also James Ramo, who is my advisor at Princeton, and also Shohei Yoda, he's a demographer at the National Institute of Population and Social Security Research in Japan. Without their support, the paper was not possible. So I first acknowledge their contribution. Thank you. So let me start with this figure. So this is a population studies seminar. So you already know that, but this is a figure showing trends in total fertility rate (TFR) across different high-income societies. And as you may know, in many high-income contexts, the TFR is already below 2.1. And you also know that the East Asia is a kind of front runner. So here I highlighted 4 context society: Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, and Singapore, where their TFR is already below 1.4 or 1.3, and even like below like a 1.0 in South Korea lately. Because the sustained low fertility is by far the most important reason for declining population and also population aging. The TFR has profound impact. Declining TFR has profound impacts on the ongoing kind of policy debates and politics and other economic issues. So essentially, because of that, the governments in declining fertility settings, they have been trying to sort of implement policies to mitigate the declining fertility trend. So for example, he was the Prime Minister of Japan, Kishida, who resigned maybe like about 6 months ago. But when he was in charge of the Prime Minister, his cabinet announced that they are trying to tackle the issue more than ever. So typically, those low fertility mitigation policy include expanding childcare services, or promoting parental leaves, or providing childcare subsidies. And indeed, the government's efforts to mitigate low fertility have a long history. So here I am showing the 2 kind of trends. One is the TFL, the blue line, as I showed just now, and the yellow line is basically how much money the government spent on those low fertility mitigation policies. And as you can see, we see some declining TFL trend over 30 years. And around like early 1990s, the Japanese government became aware of the issue. So they started the mitigation policies. So they have been continuing the policy for almost 3 decades. However, it looks like the trends doesn't really look good in terms of like the increase in TFL is good. So then the TFL is a kind of stable and also low. Meanwhile, the government spending on those policies have been increasing. As of now, the Japanese government actually have spent almost like $5 billion on those policies. However, comparing those 2 sort of contrasting trends, declining TFL, increasing government spending, you might want to conclude that those policies may not work well. And so here's a puzzle. So basically, why the fertility is declining? Is fertility declining in East Asia or including Japan, despite the extensive pronatalist policies. So indeed, there are already a number of criticism against those policies. So first, many scholars already argue that these policies tend to have very limited and also short-term impacts. The second, although this is less emphasized in existing literature, but these studies argue that essentially those mitigation policies tend to sort of target target the wrong people. Oops, sorry. By that I mean that these policies typically focus on childbirth among married couples. However, looking at the marital fertility, let's say in Japan, it's tend to be stable around 2. So which basically means that once people get married, they are expected to have 2 children. And indeed, a major driver of declining fertility in Japan and other East Asia is actually later and less marriage. So in one of my recent work, we basically estimated which one of those, like declining marriage versus declining marital fertility, which one of those matters more for declining fertility in 4 Eastern societies, including Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, and Singapore. And we basically found that in all of 4 societies, the first mechanisms, changing timing and also prevalence of marriage matters more for declining fertility. And here, of course, you already know that one important kind of contextual kind of characteristics in East Asia is that there's almost no non-marital childbearing. So that the changing timing and also prevalence of marriage directly sort of influences the fertility outcomes. So here, existing studies has some sort of implicit assumption, which is that the marriage and childbearing, they are 2 independent, different processes. So that the assumption allowed them to criticize existing pronatalist policies by arguing that basically these policies are mistargeted because they are focusing on childbirth among married couples, but actually the major driver of declining fertility in East Asia are changing timing and the prevalence of marriage. Okay. However, in this study, I'd like to propose maybe we can think in a slightly different way. So which is that there might be some indirect kind of effects of these policies. So there are a few existing studies, including mine, which basically applied the survey experiment framework, which basically found that first, unmarried people, they do not know much about these existing policies. And if they let them know, you are basically eligible for those family-friendly policies once you get married, their marriage intentions or desire tend to increase. And we also found that the perceived cost of education shapes fertility desires. And anecdotally, we also know that childbearing in East Asia, particularly in Japan, is one of the main reasons for getting married. And based on that, we can expect that perhaps the marriage decision is partly driven by fertility desires. So this is the specific research question I'm going to address in today's talk. Okay. So my research question tried to reconsider the sort of the conventional critique. So again, the existing framework, they assume that the marriage and childbearing are 2 independent processes, and existing policy try to sort of intervene with fertility processes by changing their fertility desires that leads to fertility outcomes. But here, they tend to assume that it's 2 independent processes. However, my framework here, I tentatively called the child-driven marriage framework. Maybe for some people, not all people, of course, if they first form desire to have children first, and then they start thinking about getting married in the future. So if that's true, perhaps those new policies, like existing mitigation policies, may have additional impact on fertility outcome through changing fertility desires among never married, non-married people. And we already knew that these policies has effect on the changes in fertility intention and desires among non-married people. So here, my focus here is on the, like, to what extent fertility desires and intention shape marriage formation. Okay. So here's a preview of today's talk. So again, the specific research question is, what is the role of the fertility desires in marriage formation? And basically, I found that fertility desires play an independent role in marriage entry, net of marriage desires, especially for men. So this basically suggests that the unchanging nature of the linkage between marriage and childbearing produces a sort of distinctive pathway to the ultra low fertility in East Asia, which has important theoretical as well as policy implication for our understanding of the declining fertility trends across the world. Okay, so before going into the my research design, let me briefly discuss two theoretical perspectives. So the first theoretical perspective is the role of ideation in family formation. So in sociology, there's a long tradition where scholars developed a theory called the planned behavior, where they basically put it that the positive attitudes towards a certain behavior increase the likelihood of the behavior. So this can occur either by making people ready for a transition or by reducing psychological barriers to a decision, let's say to get married. Equally, there's another theoretical kind of framework, which is the second demographic transition, which is I can say that maybe the most predominant kind of theoretical framework in understanding declining fertility in the high income settings, which put it that basically demographic change as a broader kind of societal change towards secular individualism. So here, ideation plays a central role in the decoupling of marriage and childbearing. So for more specifically, in response to these ideational changes, we have seen sort of the global increase in non-traditional family behaviors, including divorce rates or cohabitation or childless marriages. So here, they basically hypothesize that the society is moving towards more individualist kind of society. So people possess more individualistic value. That leads to sort of non-traditional family behaviors. That leads to then one outcome is actually low fertility by increasing the couple without any children. Oh yeah. So in this context, the decoupling of marriage and childbearing is a key feature to understand the low fertility in many countries. This can be most compelling seen in the rise of non-marital childbearing, which I briefly touched just now. So here's a figure showing the share of children born to the unmarried parents based on the OECD data. And you can see that in many societies, the non-marital childbearing has been increasing. So first in Nordic countries like Sweden or Denmark, and then Anglo-Saxon English-speaking countries. And then lately, some of the Southern European countries like Italy or Spain, even in those relatively conservative contexts, the non-marital childbearing has been increasing. However, you can see that there are two East Asian countries here, again, Japan and South Korea, where the non-marital childbearing is almost negligibly low, like only like a 2 or maybe 3%. So in one of the recent literature review by Professor Jia Yu and Professor Yu Xie, they concluded that the marriage is still the main institution for childbearing. So this is the conventional sort of understanding. So this is a sort of the behavioral kind of linkage. And you may wonder if the linkage is strong also for attitudes. So here I use the Japanese National Fertility Survey, which targets the never married man or woman who are aged like 18 to 34. And here I use two sort of attitudinal questions. One is the marriage intentions and also the fertility desires. And by combining those two questions, we can basically describe the patterns and trends in sort of like the attitudinal link between marriage and children. And indeed, those two attitudes are strongly linked, which basically showing that first, looking at those who have intention to marry in the future, a majority of them, they also have a fertility desires. They want to have at least one, or a majority of them actually they want to have two children. And we can see that there are some increase in people who says they don't want to have any children. Again, this is only for non-married people, but the increase is relatively kind of small. Whereas if you look at people who do not intend to marry, a majority of people, they say they don't want to have any children. This pattern looks very similar for both men and women. And we see some more rapid increase in the childless sort of desires, desire not to have any children among those people without any marriage intentions. So another theoretical perspective that motivates my research question is the theory of marriage package. So this perspective put that there's a sort of societal variation in associating one family law with another. So, for example, in one society, people may start thinking about marriage. They also have to think about other kind of family expectations, including, let's say, intensive parenting, division of labor, or caregiving for older adults. Whereas in other societies, even if they start thinking about marriage, they don't have to start thinking about, let's say, having children or raising children. And in this context, the demographer and sociologist, Larry Bumpers, he applied this idea to understanding the low fertility in East Asia. Specifically, this is a quote. An important feature of the traditional Japanese family institution, especially for women, is the extent to which the numerous intrafamilial laws are bundled together in the notion of marriage package. So this perspective makes me wonder, maybe endorsing this kind of normative statement, like multiple family expectations should be bundled together, is linked to the stronger marriage and fertility desire intentions that sort of leads to sort of stronger linkage between those two attitudes. So here's another figure using the National Fertility Survey. So here, there's another question asked in the survey, which is basically, do people endorse the normative statement, which is if one gets married, one should have children. And you can see that for both men and women, so this is also divided by whether they have an intention to marry or not. We can see that some declining trend. So people are becoming more liberal in terms of that you don't have to have children if one get married. However, still there's a division between whether they have an intention to marry or not. So basically, people who have more positive attitude towards marriage, they have like those who have intention to marry in some point, they are more likely to endorse the normative statement. And we can see that actually there are gender differences. Basically, men are more likely to endorse those like a normative statement than women. So thinking about why there are potential, like there are gender differences in terms of the notion of marriage package, it could be because, as I highlighted here, those multiple, like a bundled expectation, disproportionately apply to women more than men. And because women are more sort of expected to provide those bundled family expectation, this can be a source of work-family conflict. So that kind of leads to the sort of fewer women endorsing those kind of normative statement, or it could be because men's attitude tend to be more traditional compared to women. So based on that, I kind of speculate that maybe fertility desires matters less for marriage entry among women than men, because they are on average, they are less likely to sort of endorse the family package ideas. So here's the theoretical kind of expectation. So I hypothesize that fertility desire should influence transition to marriage net of marriage desires. So specific hypothesis, yeah. So here's a specific hypothesis. And the second hypothesis is that the association between fertility desire and transition to marriage should be weaker for women. And so let me quickly overview the data set and the method, and I'm going to show the results, and we can move on to Q&A. So for this analysis, we used the Japanese life course panel survey, which is a nationally representative longitudinal data targeting young and middle-aged men and women. And the analytical sample is men and women born between 1966 to 1998 who are never married and have no children at each wave. So the sample size in terms of the person years is about like a 7,000 for both men and women. Okay. So there are several key variables I use in this analysis. One, so the outcome is the transition to first marriage between time t and time t plus 1. And the key predictor is the fertility desires. And importantly, I need to mention that I use the variable which is measured at the first wave. So the rationale here is that there are a sizable number of couples who kind of anticipate marriage. They also kind of started thinking about having children when they get closer to getting married. So there's sort of some endogeneity issues. So to consider that, I decided to use the fertility desires measured at the first wave. And more theoretically, other theoretical perspective, they also put it that individuals, they form basic barriers regarding their like a desirable life trajectories in adolescence or early adulthood. So for example, if one individual who is at age 20 at wave 1, we use their marriage and fertility desires, and then I use those predictor variable to predict the marriage entry at each given time. Okay? So for that, I also use the marriage desires, also measure at the first wave, and the gender role attitudes. And other, so this is the list of this is how the survey asks question about fertility desires. So for the desire for fertility, they ask question about, do you want to have a child? So I basically classify those potential answers to the positive, uncertain, and negative. And for the marriage desire, they also ask question about what's your thoughts regarding marriage. And the options include definitely want to marry if possible, don't care, not thinking about marriage, and don't want to marry. So based on those options, I categorize them into the very positive, uncertain, and negative. And for other control variables, I use the birth cohort, city size, and also socioeconomic status, because we already know that those desires are patterned by socioeconomic resources, typically education attainment. We also control for the early childhood environments, because previous study argued that like the family circumstances in early adulthood, like in adolescence, they shape both family attitude and behaviors. So for that, I included self-reported living condition at age 15 and growing up with a single parent, and also the warmth of home at age 15. So for the method, I used the discrete time logic model. So here I look at the likelihood of transition to marriage as a function of the age square, and fertility desires, and other control variables, and where the uncertain attitudes as set as a reference category. And that the model 1 here, I estimated sort of the gross effect of fertility desires. And in the model 2, I estimated the sort of the effect of fertility desires net of marriage desires by including marriage desires to the model 1. So let me move on to the descriptive results. So here, this is the distribution of fertility and marriage desires for women and men at the first wave. So here we can see that the marriage and fertility desires are strongly linked. So for example, if people have positive fertility desires, about 57% of women or 54% of men, they also have a very positive attitude towards marriage. We can also see that for those who have negative attitude for childbearing, 18% of women or 26% of men, they also have a negative attitude towards marriage, which is much higher than other fertility desires group. Okay. But we can also see that these two attitudes are not perfectly correlated. So we can see that those who have some uncertain attitude towards fertility, they don't really know they want to have children. About 40% of women and 32% of men, they have a positive attitude towards marriage. Or those who have a positive attitude to fertility, they about 8% of both men and women, they have an uncertain attitude about marriage. I can skip this for the sake of time, but basically here, I wanted to argue that the selection into non-marriage at wave 1, because like age groups are quite heterogeneous at wave 1, ranging from like a 20 to age 40. So to consider whether this may like change our results, I check whether the marriage and fertility desires patterns look different by age group. Basically, I can say that the pattern looks very similar until age 35. So probably it's less concerning, but I'm happy to answer if you have any questions regarding this figure. Oh, that's interesting. We should have some bar graph here describing the basically composition of fertility and marriage desires by education group for women and men. But basically here, I wanted to show that those desires are shaped by like different across, like whether they go to college or not. Please imagine that I showed this kind of figure. So basically, like that's where I wanted to show you that I need to control for the educational time and other sort of social considerations. All right. Sometimes that could happen. I should have checked it. Sorry. Anyway, okay, this is fine. Okay. I can. Yes, okay. I made this figure using like ggplot in OWL, and sometimes it doesn't show up. Yeah, but anyway, so this is the main results. I'm fortunate to see the figure here. Okay, so this is a predicted probability of transition to marriage based on the model 1, where marriage desires are not controlled. And for first man and woman here, I'm comparing like ambivalent, like uncertain attitude towards having children, and some positive attitudes for childbearing. So then if we compare those two groups, we can see that those who have positive attitude towards children, they are more likely to sort of transition to marriage much earlier than those who have ambivalent, like uncertain attitudes for men and women. So for example, let's say if you look at people who are age 30 for women, about let's say like a 13% of women who have a positive attitude towards children, about 13% of them, they are likely to experience marriage in the following year, whereas the number is about like a 6% for women with ambivalent attitudes. Okay, there are significant, statistically significant differences. So the colored area shows the 95% confidence interval. So this is a result based on the model 2, where I included the marriage desires. So here there are gender differences. So we can see that for men, even after considering the marriage desire, which is highly sort of correlated with the fertility desires. So you may wonder that the fertility desires, sort of the positive influence of fertility desires is caused by their correlation with the marriage desire. But even after controlling for marriage desire, we still see statistically significant difference in terms of whether they have uncertain attitudes versus positive attitude towards children for men. However, for women, the confidence interval are overlap. So then we don't really say that it's statistically different, significantly different. So in the specification, I also included the gender role attitudes. So here I kind of suspect that maybe the results for men kind of caused because they have more traditional attitudes. And indeed, actually those who have a more traditional gender attitudes, they are more likely to transition to marriage much earlier than like a less traditional attitude, those with less traditional attitudes. However, even after considering like a gender differences in gender role attitudes, we still see significant gender differences here. So I recognize that my measure of the fertility desires is not perfect. I'm also aware that there are multiple ways to define desires. So for that, I also examine whether my results are robust to the different specification. So basically, I did two things. First, I switched the fertility desires to the desired timing of marriage, which basically show the same results. And I also checked if my results are robust to the different timing of timing definition. So here's the result. So here, this is also the predicted probability figure showing the probability of marriage for men. But here I use fertility desires at t-1 and marriage desires at t-2. And I basically found a very similar results. So in this study, I basically examined the two hypotheses. So first, net of marriage desires, stronger fertility desires are positively associated with transition to marriage, which is supported. For the hypothesis two, I also expected that there are gender differences, and this is supported. Yes, this is supported. And so those results suggest that maybe the higher sort of opportunity cost of marriage and parenthood may suppress the low fertility desires in transition to marriage. So the intuition here is that maybe those desires drive people into certain behaviors, here in this case marriage, but the sort of the positive role of the fertility desires may be suppressed among women because they are expected to provide many different kinds of expectations once they get married. So there are several theoretical implications, and I will discuss some policy implications, and I will finish the talk. So here I paid explicit attention to the role of the fertility desires in marriage formation in context characterized by the notion of family, like a strong marriage package. And based on that, I also evaluated the alternative sort of mechanisms to understand declining fertility in East Asia, which is the child-driven marriage. I believe this is bringing a sort of new perspective to our understanding of declining fertility trend in East Asia. So I also think that this has important implication for sort of the relationship between the SDT, like a second demographic transition framework, and the empirical kind of trends in East Asia. So again, East Asia has been sort of treated as a theoretical anomaly in terms of the under the theoretical like the SDT framework, because the SDT framework put it that there should be the decoupling of marriage and childbearing, which is one sort of the like a co-current trends with the low fertility trend. However, in East Asia, there's almost no non-marital childbearing. So I don't still know why there's very strong kind of linkage between marriage and childbearing in the East Asia societies. However, given the context exists, we can discuss that perhaps there are similar kind of trends towards secular individualism, like the rise in individualistic values that leads to the low fertility in Europe and North America by increasing sort of the childless couples. However, in Japan and the East Asian context, those attitudinal change may lead to the sort of weaker fertility intentions. They have less interest in having children. And in East Asian context, childbearing is one of the main reasons for getting married. That leads to sort of weaker incentive for partnership or marriage. That leads to fewer marriage, and that leads to low fertility. So here, I want to discuss that the observed pattern in East Asia is not inconsistent with the SDT framework. So let me lastly discuss some of the policy implications. So first, results from this study suggest that there might be some unintended kind of consequences of the pro-natalist policies that has been kind of implemented in many of the East Asian societies. So these policies typically criticized by existing scholars because it is basically targeting the wrong people. It is like a mistargeted. But maybe these policies may have some indirect kind of influence through shaping fertility desires among married people. Still, these policies target a very specific groups, typically like a heterosexual married couples. So other group of individuals are excluded from potential benefit of those policies. I'm more sort of concerned with the sort of the additional another consequences of these mitigation policies. So again, these policies tend to sort of support women in the workplace, women in the labor market by providing childcare services or expanding parental leaves. And that kind of tend to benefit like people with the high socioeconomic resources. So mistargeted policies may benefit high SSA family that could lead to the exacerbating inequality. So indeed, one of my co-authors, Ryota Mugiyama, he published a paper RSSM last year, 2 years ago, and where he found that sort of the educational gradients in maternal employment had been diverging in a recent kind of birth cohort. So here he compared two birth cohorts, 1970s and 1980s. In the 1970s cohort, there was almost no educational gradients before and after childbearing. But in the later cohort, 1980s cohort, we see that highly educated women, they are more like increasingly continue their employment even after childbearing, perhaps thanks to those low fertility mitigation policies, which supports working women. So here, this is the end of the slide. Thank you so much. Yeah.